Terry Barber is a best-selling author and founder of Lighthouse Catholic Media. Jesse Romero is a retired law enforcement officer, a former kickboxing champion with a master's degree in theology. And together, they share a passion for evangelization and PhDs in common sense. You're listening to The Terry and Jesse Show. To join the show, call 888-914-9149. Here's Terry and Jesse.
Welcome to the Terry and Jesse Show. God bless you all. Hope you know that thank God it's Friday. Remember last Friday, I gave everyone homework. What was the homework? To do an examination of conscience each night, thanking God. Also, after you do your examination of conscience, do your act of contrition. But in addition, every single day, thank God for that day. One specific thing that you want to thank Jesus for. And that's what I'm hoping that you're doing. And if you haven't been doing it, I'm your conscience saying, get back to doing your examination of conscience and thanking Jesus every day for the blessings, because this is, thank God it's Friday day. I have my good friend, wait, you're going to be in for a treat. But before I give you the good news of my partner here, Jesse Romero's out of town. I'll be in Arizona tomorrow and giving parish missions. If you ever want to contact the Terry and Jesse, just go to Relevant Radio on our show page, and we'd love to come to your parish. But today I have a special guest, but I want to just say hello to the people on the East Coast again and out in the East Coast and the West and the Midwest. We're brand new. This is our second week on Relevant Radio. My background is I started doing evangelization 40 years ago. Yes, when I had hair on my head. You can't see me, but I don't have any hair on my head now. And I started groups like St. Joseph Communications, Lighthouse Catholic Media, Catholic Resource Center. And now I'm doing full-time radio ministry with Relevant Radio, and I'm honored to do that. If you've ever heard of people like Scott Hahn, you have? Well, I was the one who recorded his original conversion story, and now he's kind of like a common name. People like Tim Staples, Jeff Cavins, oh gosh, the list goes on. Alex Jones, Jesse Romero. Yeah, all these guys have conversion stories. I got involved in exposing them to the Catholic faith, and it's just touched people because conversion stories touch people. Because as Pope Paul VI said, people will listen more to a testimony than to a teacher. And if he listens to a teacher, it's because they're giving a testimony. And today, Matt Arnold is in my studio. I've known Matt for 20 years, nearly 20 years. He's worked here with me at St. Joseph Communications as the creative director, producing all kinds of videos. You've seen him on different stations. He's an amazing man. I've still been close friends with him all these years. And I invited him because I wanted to give an opportunity for you to learn a little bit about this man, because he's a very talented man and another convert that's blessing the church. Matt Arnold, welcome to the Terry and Jesse Show.
Well, thank you very much, Terry, and honored to be here as always.
Absolutely. I've had many radio shows with you over the years. And Matt, for the benefit of those few people who don't know who you are.
those happy few, yes.
Right. Tell us a little bit about, you've been in the church, 20-some years now?
Yeah, 1996 I came to the church.
You're a convert. Tell us your story briefly of how you walked into the Catholic Church.
Okay, my story briefly. Well, I was raised kind of in a tradition of generic Christianity, okay, in the sense that we had a Christmas tree and Easter eggs, prayers before bed and grace before meals. But like millions of other families, mine fell away from going to church back in the early 60s when I was just a little kid. So I grew up, as they say today, unchurched. And in the 1970s, the astrology and the occult and so forth was very popular. And you probably, you were there. Back when you had hair, you remember this.
That's right.
That these things were very popular. It was a very big part of popular culture. And that really affected me because,
of course,
being unchurched, I still had that need or that desire for the supernatural and the transcendent. And I just looked for it in all the wrong places, as they say. So I got into astrology and tarot cards and crystals and even seances.
Now, Matt, that's kind of tying into Halloween, but that's later in the show. Let me ask you this. Didn't you get also involved in the entertainment industry?
Absolutely. I was a professional musician, full-time from the time I was 19 years old. And I did that until I was about 30. And then I switched over and did magic and comedy in Hollywood for the next several years until I wound up coming to Covina and working for Terry Barber in 1998.
I remember those days, and thank you for doing that and saying yes to Jesus. Your recordings are still out there with Lighthouse Catholic Media, St. Joseph Communications, and also the Catholic Resource Center carries a lot of your material. So, Matt, now that you were in the entertainment industry, then you went into being a magician, and you were using magic. Was there any temptation at that time to go on the dark side, or is that not a fair statement?
Like I say, I was involved in a lot of New Age practices, and I was what most people are who are involved in New Age or occult. I was a dabbler. I would be involved in the spirituality du jour. I would do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and get bored with it and move on to something else. But it's important to remember that I didn't think of myself as being in league with Satan or doing anything evil.
Right.
These all seemed like good things that were going to help me in my life, help me achieve inner peace and so forth. But it was when I was involved in the music industry that I got involved in something called channeling, which is essentially like seances.
Wow.
Right?
Explain that.
Well, the Bible calls it necromancy. It's the idea is that you're making contact with the spirits of the dead, consulting ghosts for oracles, right?
Yes.
Looking for advice and so forth. The Catechism would suggest that really what's behind it all is seeking power and particularly power over other people, which is in fact evil.
Was there a particular moment in your entertainment life of, our magician, is there something that happened to you that made you just say, I'm done?
Oh, well, absolutely. I have a turning point in my story, which is a familiar turning point from a lot of convert stories. I met this girl, right?
Betty.
Betty, yes.
I love it.
My lovely bride of some 26 years now.
Congratulations.
Thank you, and God and her. But in those days, I didn't tell people about what I was doing. Like I said, I didn't join any covens or anything. It was just a little handful of us at get together at the recording studio and do this dance business. And one time while I was out of town, I was on the road with my band, and the guy that was producing our records actually called her and said, hey, why don't we go up there and we'll surprise Matthew and I'll drive you up, because we were playing at a little town up in Northern California. And she says, okay. And she was working at, I think, Paramount Studios at the time. So after work, she came to the studio, and the idea that they would carpool up there. But when they were in the studio, they did the little seance thing.
Wow.
And invited her into it because the spirits apparently had a message for her, which was, stay the heck away from Matthew because you're going to screw up his destiny.
Wow.
Yeah. And now she wanted nothing to do with it, as you might imagine. She's like, wow, let me out of here. and saying so. And they wouldn't let it. And the lady who was kind of our medium, she's in a trance and apparently talking with voices of disembodied spirits and so forth. She's like, I want nothing to do with this. And they're all trying, no, it's okay. Just relax. Just open yourself up. And so she said she just closed her eyes and just started praying interiorly to, the Blessed Mother and St. Michael the Archangel. And for the first time in the experience of our little circle, the spirits went all ballistic and started screaming and cursing and so forth, and saying that, calling our Blessed Mother all sorts of terrible names and saying, don't try and go to her because she can't help you here, right? Which again, like I say, that's nothing like we'd experienced, but it clearly soured me on this whole experience. First off, that the spirits would go behind my back trying to break me up with my girlfriend.
Yeah, really. That's bad news right there. That just kicks
in the code of the West,
Exactly.
And also the idea that I was already at that place where I was feeling more and more uncomfortable with it. And I know, looking backward with the eyes of faith, that it was her prayers on my behalf, that she was praying rosaries and so forth for me when we were dating.
Wow.
In fact, she told me.
Yeah, what's that?
After we got married, she said, I've been praying for you since I was a little girl.
Now, wait a minute. Now, time out. She's in her 20s, and she's telling you that she's been praying for you? That's the same thing my wife did. Tell us what happened with you.
What it was, and of course, I wasn't Catholic at the time. I'm going, that's a pretty good trick. How'd you manage that?
Yeah, really?
Because we didn't meet till, as you say, we were in our 20s.
Sure.
And she said, when I was 7 years old, I discerned that I did not have a religious vocation. How about that?
Okay.
And she said that I figured that meant I would be a wife and a mom. So she started praying for the man she would marry someday. And she didn't know who it was, right? And I certainly didn't, but God, of course, did.
Yeah.
And so I can look back with the eyes of faith and see those times in my life where I benefited from the grace that was channeled through those prayers.
And then, Matthew, my question, that's beautiful that your wife did that. But, you got closer to your wife, you got married, but you still weren't a Catholic when you married her. Is that a fair statement?
That's true. I did not come into the church.
What's your problem?
Well, the funny thing is, I was not interested in becoming Catholic. And here's another thing.
Yeah.
You know, people talk about the channeling stuff, and
Yeah.
I invite people to take it with a grain of salt. You don't have to believe that we were really talking to disembodied spirits, whatever.
Right.
But understand that whether it was fraud or delusion or the devil himself, the devil's purpose was certainly being accomplished.
Absolutely.
Because we were as far away from God as you can possibly be. And when I finally broke out of it, I didn't want to have anything to do with anything even remotely spiritual.
Wow, I can see why.
I became practically agnostic.
Yeah.
You know, now my wife, very, very clever, she had me, you know, going to mass with her. You know, I was a musician and working in entertainment, so that means working nights and whatnot.
Of course.
And weekends, so the only time we really had together was Sunday. You know, and I would come over to her folks' house and she'd be like, okay, well, you know, we're going to go out to dinner, but you know, I didn't go to mass this morning, so.
I love it. That was clever.
Yeah. And, you know, so I was spending some time in front of the Blessed Sacrament and wondering what it was about, but wasn't ready to convert. And I went through the process of coming into the church, and it is a process.
Yes.
The priest who was, you know, if you're not Catholic,
right.
The priest who helped us through it, he could see that I wasn't ready.
Right.
And so he made me promise to take RCIA. He said, when the kids come along and start having questions.
Of course they will.
And that was the catalyst.
What did your son, what happened?
Well, you know the story.
I know, but we only have a minute before the break. I want to hear what happened.
Okay, quickly then, before the break. My son Macklin was not quite 3 years old.
Yes.
And he asked Mommy, why does everybody go to communion except for me and Daddy?
Yeah, good question, Macklin.
And she says, well, you have to understand that the host is really Jesus. And he says, well, 2-year-old Macklin, if that's Jesus, where's his hair? And Betty said, go ask your dad.
Oh, my gosh.
To prove to me that he really had questions. And so that's how I took RCIA, and then the rest, as they say, is history.
Matt Arnold is my guest here at the Terry and Jesse Show. Fantastic interview on your conversion because it's so special. Matt, how can people get a hold of you? Is there a website?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. If you want to know more about me or any of the stuff that I'm doing, it's super easy. You can go to MatthewArnold.org.
Wonderful. And as I said, we're going to talk more with Matt about his conversion. But here's the question I'm going to ask. You're going to come back after the break. Up next, is there a connection with Halloween and the New Age and the occult? More in a moment.
You're listening to The Terry and Jesse Show on Relevant Radio.
We're back. It's Terry and Jesse's show. Wow. I have my good friend Matt Arnold here because Jesse's out of town. Thank God it's Friday. If you just tuned in, I gave the homework at the beginning of the show. We're supposed to thank God every day, but on Fridays, let's make sure before we go to bed, after we do our examination of conscience and we do our act of contrition, right, everybody? Yes. Then we thank God for the blessings of the day because an attitude of gratitude is welcome just about everywhere. I have my good friend Matt Arnold here, and I made a comment before we broke for the break, and I said, is there a connection with Halloween, the New Age movement, and the occult? And you just heard Matt Arnold talking about his conversion from the New Age movement. So, Matt, can you answer those questions?
Is there a connection between Halloween and the occult? Well, yes and no.
Yes and no. A lot of things in Catholic are like that, right?
Yeah, pretty much everything, actually.
Exactly.
Got a both-and proposition.
Yep.
Well, first off, I mentioned that most, people that are in the New Age movement, don't consider themselves doing anything evil, of course.
Right.
Even people that are deeply involved in sin don't want to think that they're doing anything bad or wrong.
Well, that's true.
And here's the thing. You got most New Agers would really be terribly offended if you associated them with witchcraft. And then witches would be terribly offended if you were to associate them with Satanism because, most of the, at least publicly, the various Wiccan groups and witch groups, will say, oh no, we don't even believe in the devil. And the interesting thing is that the actual official Church of Satan, the tax-exempt Church of Satan.
Yes, that just came in like 40 years ago.
Right,
sure.
Yeah. They actually don't say they don't believe in the devil either.
That's right.
Because they don't believe in God. They say they're atheists.
Yes.
And that really the only thing that they believe is the highest power is they themselves. And here, that's the thing that actually is the thread, though. New Agers aren't witches, and witches aren't Satanists, and apparently even Satanists aren't Satanists, but they all believe that they are themselves essentially their own God.
Isn't it a fair statement? I've read this, that once you stop believing in God, you start to be your own God.
Well, back in the 80s, Shirley MacLaine, who really helped to popularize the New Age movement, she wrote that book, Out on a Limb. And in the book, she says, you are God. And to worship yourself is to worship God. You should never worship anything or anyone other than yourself, she said.
Yeah.
You know, and so there it is right in a nutshell. Somebody once said that the New Age Trinity is me, myself, and I. But here's the point, though. If New Agers aren't witches and witches aren't Satanists and even Satanists aren't Satanists, who was it who told our first parents that you could be like God?
You know it.
Yeah. It was Satan, wasn't it?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, Halloween, of course, is the vigil of All Saints' Day.
Exactly.
So it has nothing to do with witches and goblins and ghosties or any of that stuff. In fact, a lot of those cultural things that do come from pagan culture. Here in Southern California, we have the Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, in the Hispanic culture.
That's right, at the funeral, at the cemeteries. Yeah,
and they have a lot of cultures to honor the people that have died. But you know, the Dia de los Muertos was originally celebrated in the springtime. Even the European pagan stuff for the dead was celebrated in the spring.
And why was that in the spring? What was the purpose of that? Well, you
know, the pagans don't have this idea of the harvest where the souls are coming into heaven. That comes from Jesus.
Amen.
Right? That's in Matthew 13, where he talks about the weeds and the wheat.
Yep.
Then they're going to gather the wheat into the barn and the weeds into the fire, right? So the Grim Reaper, that whole thing, that's all Christian. All Hallows Eve is Christian. The only reason it's held on the 31st of October in the first place is because when they instituted All Saints' Day, it was after the period of persecution. There were so many martyrs, so many people that had given heroic witness to the faith, that there were more than them than there were days in a year. So the church created a holiday to celebrate them all the saints that didn't have their own day, right?
Yes, of course.
And so many people would descend upon Rome that they decided to do it on the 1st of November when the harvest had come in, so there'd be food enough for everybody. I mean, it's very practical.
Very practical.
It wasn't because there was some, satanic thing that we tried to Christianize or baptize.
Yeah, right.
It's been the other way around. It's the witches and so forth that have co-opted a Christian holiday.
So basically, in maybe the last 70 years, all this witch stuff and evil stuff on Halloween came in. Before that, we really didn't have the effect that we have now. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, and it is true.
Yes.
It is entirely true that witches and Satanists and so forth do bad things on Halloween.
That's right. That's their...
And they are perfectly happy. Satan is a liar from the beginning.
Yep,
the father
that's what the Bible says.
And he is absolutely happy to co-opt some Christian thing and turn it into something else. So do witches do bad things, or Satanists or whatever do bad things on Halloween? Oh, of course they do.
Yeah.
But it's not because of some historical precedent, but because they're, cashing in on some popular thing.
Well, Matt, now that we've got the historical perspective, Mom and Dad are listening going, that's fine, Mr. Arnold. That's great.
But.
Exactly. We're here in 2017. Matt, I didn't mention that you're a father of, 6 children?
6 children, yes.
So, and I'm a father of 4 children, so we know what it's about when Halloween comes. Tell us right now the balance Mom and Dad should have regarding getting the kids dressed up. Should they be dressing as saints? Should they be going out to get the candy? I'm going to give you my opinion, but a father of 6, I think our listeners would love to hear your comments.
Well, first of all, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Amen.
I mean, if you're gonna go down this road, then you have to throw out your Christmas tree and your stockings and all the rest of it, because those things aren't specifically Christian either. Trick or treats is American as apple pie. It was started by the Boy Scouts of America back in the 1920s.
Yep.
Because Halloween was kind of, in some cultures, it was sort of a mischief night.
Mm-hmm.
Right? My dad used to talk about how these switch gates and soap windows. And
yes, all kinds of.
They didn't go trick or treating.
Right.
It was actually posited by the Boy Scouts as an alternative to doing mischief. It's kind of a benign extortion scheme where you go knock on the door and say trick or treat, and they give you the candy so that you don't throw an egg at their house. Right? It's the whole idea. That's the deal. But that's, like I say, it's American as apple pie. But it's become big business, and we'll talk about that later in the program.
Absolutely.
But as far as people with kids, I'm not against taking the kids out for trick or treat, wearing costumes, all that stuff. But when I was a kid, we didn't spend a lot of money on it.
Nope.
And we made our own costumes, and I didn't grow up Catholic, but I was a cowboy more often than not, or a hobo or something.
Sure.
It's just you put on your old dad's clothes, or you put on your cowboy outfit, which back when I was a kid, every boy had a cowboy outfit, and it was a fun thing. Whereas, the bad thing that's happening at Halloween is, two-pronged sword. There's a lot of the horrific, where people are, and even children are dressing up as, these terrifying things. And then you also have the impure side, the immodest side, where there are an awful lot of young people, not only adults that are dressing up in very immodest costumes, but also now they're even marketing that sort of thing for children.
Right.
And that's a really sad development. As a Catholic dad, I prefer, when the kids were little, we used to do that. We used to do, where we'd dress them up as saints, and we'd have a party, and every kid would get up and in their saint costume and then talk about, they just give clues as to who their saint was. Oh, I'm the patron of this, and I was born in such and such a country in such and such a year, and so on. And then the other kids would have to guess which saint they were dressed up as. And, typically it wasn't that difficult. We had a lot of St. Michael the Archangels and a lot of St. Therese of Lisieux and so forth.
Sure.
So it wasn't terribly challenging for them, but it was a nice wholesome way to have a Halloween party.
That is, and we would call them All Saints parties,
sure.
And we would get the kids dressed up in the Saints outfit, and then they'd have to explain in front of everyone. They'd have to do their own research on what is this saint's story, what's behind this saint, and so we would learn about the holy men and women of our church. And so I think that was a good idea. I know that you and your wife homeschooled your kids. Did you not do that also? Because we did that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And I thought that was very efficacious because it showed role models of holiness that the kids need to know that we're all called to holiness. That's what the Second Vatican Council has called us all to be. So I get that. Matt, the question I have now that we've given the historical perspective of Halloween and we've come up with, the practical ways of having our children participate, what things would you avoid when the kids are a little older, and I mean teenagers, and now they're getting older and they're being invited to go to parties and to these places where they're going to get scared, haunted houses. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't you avoid that as a rule?
Me as a parent?
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
What would you warn them on that?
It's just like with anything. There's discernment here. The people that are listening are adult Catholics that have been, confirmed and they've got the gifts of the Holy Spirit. They need to exercise their own discernment in these matters. But, a lot of it's just common sense. It's the same thing that you would do with anything that your kid wanted to do. You wanted to make sure that there's an adult presence and that it was, sure. Hanky-panky isn't going to be going on without somebody there to handle it.
Well, here's my big problem with this also is that when they do things like this, it seems that when they put a mask on, they think that they're not really looking at and that they can do things that they normally can't do. And so immodest dress, like they don't normally wear very little clothing, but they're doing it for a Halloween. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a problem, is it not?
Well, yeah, and even with adults, I think that's an issue, with, ladies especially.
Yeah. When we come back, I want to ask the question, do you think it's a problem that we spend over $9 billion on Halloween? That's second to Christmas. More in a moment.
For today's giveaway, call 877-526-2151.
Catholic and proud of it. It's the Terry and Jesse Show on Relevant Radio.
Absolutely. We're honored to be here in your car, at home, or wherever you're at. Jesse Romero's out of town, so I have my good friend Matt Arnold. If you missed a little bit of Matt, he was talking about his conversion story coming from the New Age movement to being an on-fire Catholic who's involved with Catholic apostolates. But I left you on a question. I said, is it right that here in America, the Halloween celebration is costing, we're spending $9.1 billion. What? I didn't say million with a B. $1 billion. That's up 8% from last year. What is it that is making people spend so much money on costumes and candy and all the festivities? And then my other question is, could that money be spent somewhere else that might be more efficacious? Just maybe. Matt, what are your thoughts? What's the reason that we're spending so much money on this, the second most holiday, the second highest amount of money for a holiday?
Okay, well, first off, I think that Christmas is too commercial. Okay,
of course.
So start there and come back.
Yeah, gotcha.
It's funny. I went to CVS to pick up a prescription,
sure.
and It's a drugstore out here in California.
Yeah.
And they had the Halloween stuff up earlier this month, but they also have all the Christmas stuff up already. It's just amazing to me. They don't even wait for Halloween to be over now.
Not anymore.
To get the Christmas stuff. But why are we spending so much money on it? Well, it's big business. The baby boomers, were the first people that went trick-or-treating and stuff. Right? I mean, it was established in the 20s, but it really didn't become popular until after the Second World War.
That's true.
When people started doing it, and then in the 60s we had the Charlie Brown.
That's right.
Great Pumpkin.
Yep.
And all that stuff, and it really entered into the popular culture. Well, those kids grew up, became adults. Right? Mm-hmm. They're our age now, and they have kids, and so they're still celebrating Halloween and passing it on down to their own children. So that's just the practical aspect of it. It's a moneymaker, and the people in business, I mean, they have Halloween cards. Now, did you ever send a Halloween card when you were a kid?
I don't think so. Are you kidding?
Of course not. So it's marketing. That's the first thing. But the second thing, of course, is the spiritual void, I think, that's in our culture.
Of course, you nailed it. People leave church, they go to these things. Hey, I was online and I was doing some research for the show, and I went on some websites that were like what I would call fundamentalist Christians, kind of like the Jack Chick people who are anti-Catholic.
Yeah, they're
sites.
very anti-Halloween. That's for sure.
And that's my question. Tell our people that are listening, is that a good idea to do that, or do you think you can avoid that? Probably be a good idea.
Absolutely. I mean, that's just the thing. And this is something that I've cautioned people about for 20 years.
Yeah.
I mean, ecumenism is a wonderful thing, and I think the finest example of it is outside abortion clinics where Christians of all backgrounds are praying.
Absolutely.
And doing, trying to help to save lives, okay? That's a good kind of ecumenism. But, going to a fundamentalist website to find out about Halloween is probably not the best idea because, with all due respect to everyone involved, history is not exactly their strong suit. So, we have a lot of misinformation that's going on. You mentioned Jack Chick, if I may.
You got to tell the background of him, though, because most people don't know who he is.
Yeah, he's a real fundamentalist guy who decided that he would evangelize via these little comic books.
Yes.
They're called Chick Tracts.
Many people have seen them.
I've seen Chick Tracts, yeah. And there's several on Halloween. There's one of them called Boo that says that to Satanists and witches, Halloween's no joke. It's the most solemn ceremony of the year. And there's a certain amount of truth in that. They've kind of co-opted things. Mm-hmm. But he gives us a history of it. And he says it started back in the British Isles with the Druids. Okay. And here's the thing, too. Any time anybody references the Druids, I remember reading a scholarly article on this, even before I was Catholic back in the 90s, by an Anglican priest who'd done a great deal of research.
Sure.
He said when you talk about the Druids, there's one of three things. He says there's what we'd like to know about the Druids, which is everything.
Yes.
What we think we know, which is entirely conjecture, and what we actually know, which is almost nothing.
That's funny.
Right? So, that's an easy place to go. But they said October 31st was their night of terror, and they called it Samhain. It's spelled Samhain. Looks like Sam Hain, but they call it Samhain. And that's a real thing, that term. But it's not some ancient god of the dead, like the witches will tell you, or the Wiccans and the Neo-pagans, and it's certainly not the night of terror. Samhain is actually just an old Celtic word for autumn.
Ah, interesting.
Okay. Anyway, but they said the Druids would go house to house looking for sacrificial victims, right? So there's their tying it into trick-or-treating. And then when they would take someone from a house, they would leave a jack-o'-lantern, a lit jack-o'-lantern, to protect the home from demons and death. It's like, well, it didn't do a very good job of protecting from death if you just took somebody out of the house to sacrifice. And the Druids were a done deal long before Columbus went to the New World. So how do you get a pumpkin?
Yeah, that's a fact. Yeah,
right?
Come on.
It's the point is now I don't want to squash a flea with a sledgehammer. My point is, a lot of this thinking of Halloween as this evil satanic thing with roots in European history has really made it into kind of mainstream evangelicalism. You see a lot of the evangelical churches, and they'll have a harvest festival, which weirdly pagans did have.
Yep.
What they didn't have was a celebration for the Vigil of All Saints' Day.
Sure.
Right, which is the point of the feast. So people don't know about it, but it's not because, as we said in the first segment, it's not about a historical human sacrifice and dogs and cats living together and so forth.
For those who just tuned in, I'm interviewing Matt Arnold. You're saying that doesn't sound like Jesse Romero. And you know why? It isn't. Jess is out of town. I have my good friend Matt Arnold, who's a convert from the New Age movement. He's very involved in the church. He has his own ministry. He's worked with St. Joseph Communications over the years. I've been a good friend of his for almost 20 years. And we're talking about Halloween, but I want to ask this question because if you missed it, when we talked earlier about All Saints Day, Hallow Eve before All Saints Day, and how we can, as Christians, as Catholic Christians, use this feast day in a way of teaching our flock, especially our kids, devotion to the saints. Because let's face it,
Amen.
All Saints Day is all the saints. It says what it means. It says what it means. So we get a chance to catechize our kids regarding the saints. And Matt, just on an apologetic level, for those who aren't Catholic listening, because you're a convert, did that make any sense to you? I mean, before you became a Catholic, how would you explain the communion of the saints to people saying, well, why would you even want to know about the saints when we've got Jesus?
Right. Yeah. Of course, that's another point of confusion. Really, that's why Halloween was a mischief night, is because, some Protestant communities in the early time, a lot of Catholics first came to this country, it became a mischief night.
Yep.
And partially because of their disdain for the Catholic teaching of the communion of saints. But the communion of saints, what it boils down to is it's really about, what our separated brethren might call a big prayer chain.
Yes,
right?
that's
it's
it.
about, as they would
Father
have no
Roberts,
problem saying, hey, I pray for you, you pray for me. Absolutely. Well, if you ask me to pray for you because you're going to have an operation on Thursday and I get hit by a bus on Wednesday and go to heaven, am I not going to pray for you? Of course I am.
Of course you are.
And that's the thing. It's not necromancy. It's not talking to the dead.
Nope.
Because the saints in heaven are more alive than anyone.
Amen.
Because they enjoy the beatific vision. They're actually face to face with God. It doesn't get much better than that.
No, and Matt, thanks for that explanation on the communion of the saints. You're listening to the Terry and Jesse show. If it's your first time, we're brand new on the East Coast and the Midwest. I'm delighted to be here Monday through Friday with you. I always tell people I'm too blessed to be stressed, too anointed to be disappointed, and if hope was money, I'd be a billionaire. And I want to inspire you with the teachings of the church so that it'll get you to heaven. Yes, because the church is the bride of Christ. And by following what Jesus' church is teaching, we get to heaven through the sacraments, through the confession, the sacrament of anointing of the sick when we're sick. We have the Eucharist, baptism, all these great sacraments that point us to Jesus. Matt Arnold is my guest, and I wanted to ask Matt, with Halloween being, again, the second most popular, event in the sense of celebrations, for mom and dad that are listening, can you give us some concrete advice in helping mom and dad navigate through this particular Halloween period and show them how it can be sanctified in the sense of All Saints Day? I'd like to ask you that question.
Well, certainly. I mean, the things that we've said before in regard to your own family celebration, you have traditions that are religious as well as cultural for Christmas, for Easter.
Yep.
The Feast of All Saints is an holy day of obligation. And it happens on November 1st. That means that it doesn't fall on, a Sunday every time.
No.
It's one of those things where the church is so serious about this that they've made it a day that if you miss Mass through your own fault on that day, it's a mortal sin.
Yeah, it's serious.
Right? This is the thing. And so you need to have traditions in your own family that have to do with All Saints Day that maybe go beyond candy and watching a rerun of Frankenstein or whatever on the Late Late Show. You want to be able to make sure that your kids understand what it is and why it's important, along with the celebration. And absolutely, there's a wonderful celebratory aspect to the fact that we're about, it's a vigil. Tomorrow, October 31st, the next day is going to be the Feast of All Saints, and it should be a day of rejoicing and be treated like a holy day.
Well said. Oh, my goodness. Matt Arnold, my good friend, I love asking you these questions about the New Age movement and how, you're a convert to the Catholic faith. Gus, up next, I want to ask you about your time right now, what you're doing in the Catholic Church. It's 20 years now you've been a Catholic. I know a secret that a new book has come out.
Yeah, I hope it's not too much of a secret.
Well, it's a secret for a lot of our listeners, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that because I think it'll reach people. If you have a friend or a relative that's left the church because he says, I'm too orthodox, I'm too conservative for the Catholic Church, I'm going to, go outside the church and do my own thing and be my own pope, so to speak, and leave the church. And if you have someone like that, you're going to want to hear this segment, because we're going to talk about Matt Arnold's new book. It will reach people who might think that they have a better idea than Christ when he established his church. More in a moment. You won't want to miss this.
Buckle up. This is the Terry and Jesse Show on Relevant Radio.
Yes, keep that seatbelt on, because you're going to need it. It's the Terry and Jesse Show is right. My brother Jesse's out of town. He'll be back on Monday. I have my good friend Matt Arnold, who's a convert to the Catholic faith. Remember what Pope Paul VI said, everyone? He said this: people will listen more to witnesses than to teachers, and they will listen to teachers if they're witnessing. Well, Matt Arnold today gave us his conversion testimony. Mm-hmm. He talked about
the thumbnail version.
You also gave us information on the Halloween celebration and All Saints Day. But, Matt, you have a book that Ignatius Press, one of the premier book publishing houses in America, that you're publishing a book through Ignatius Press. And I think it's very interesting. I'm not going to say it's for everyone, but it has a special niche for people who have left the church because they're not happy with the church. It's called Confessions of a Traditional Catholic by Matt Arnold. And by the way, I might say, with a foreword by Dr. Hahn, saying with my book, How to Share Your Faith with Anyone. So, gosh, Matt, you hang with the same people I hang with.
Well, yeah, it's like it was wonderful of Scott to write a foreword for the book. And he actually kind of was instrumental in prompting me to go down the road of writing it. And really what it's about.
Tell us.
Because I gave the first part of my conversion story. Here I am. I come into the church. Pope John Paul II, St. John Paul II was the first pope I'd ever known. The liturgy was the liturgy that I embraced.
Sure.
Complete with guitar music and lay lectures and so forth. Sometimes I was both of those things. Mm-hmm. Being a former musician, the first thing they did was get me in the music ministry. Mm-hmm. But I had something of a crisis during a time when it was really hard where I resided to be able to find a reverently celebrated liturgy. And somebody suggested that I go to a traditional Latin Mass. And there was one being celebrated, and that it was, 20 miles away.
Sure.
But under the
diocese.
Yeah, it was an Ecclesia Dei indult in those days from St. John Paul II. And so it was all on the up and up and everything. Yeah. And it was wonderful. I loved it. My wife's a cradle Catholic, very devout. We went to our first traditional Latin Mass, and I said, what do you think?
And what did she say?
She said, I feel like I've been to Mass for the first time in my life.
Oh, my gosh.
She was really profoundly, and so we started to assist there. The problem is that ultimately our pastor retired, and they retired the Mass with him. So we were at that point, where do we go? Where do we go now? And there was so much hanky-panky going on with the liturgy that I found myself ultimately and my family at a chapel, an independent chapel, right? A validly ordained priest, valid Mass, but not in union with the local bishop. And of course, that caused it was a great conflict for me personally, because I don't have any animus against the new Mass, nor no particular love for the Latin language. I've only been Catholic since 1996. Didn't have a dog in that fight, as they say.
Yes.
But the reverence, the dignity, the sacrality, so attracted me. Mm-hmm. I discovered while I was there the great spiritual danger that lies in separating yourself from the authority of the church.
Well said.
Stepping outside the structure.
Yep.
When was it, it's I still consider myself a traditional Catholic.
Sure, I do too.
I still go to the, absolutely, so should you.
Yeah.
It's like the teaching of the church hasn't changed.
Exactly.
Right? And I assist at the Benedict XVI, I almost called him Blessed Benedict XVI. Yeah. That's above my pay grade. Okay.
Right.
I can't beatify anybody.
You can't beatify. But extraordinary form.
Yes, but he called it the extraordinary form. And most Catholics who assist at the traditional Mass do so under diocesan auspices today.
That's right.
And in full communion with the church. But there was that time when I stepped outside that communion, and so I've been on both sides of the liturgical divide. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to be there to answer those questions. Why does an intelligent, fervent, in my case, a full-time apologist and evangelist in a conservative Novus Ordo apostolate, what would cause you to do that?
Right.
And so I wanted to give people some insight into that and to send up a flare about the danger that is inherent in setting yourself apart and separating yourself from the assembly, as it says in the book of Acts.
So basically, people who have left the church for...
And they would not consider themselves to have left the church.
No, but they yeah, I understand that they think they're more Catholic than the Pope.
Right.
I get it. They would benefit if they can go to Ignatius Press to get the book. Or, Matthew, how do I get a hold of you again, please?
Yeah, you can visit my website anytime, just MatthewArnold.org, and find out all about me and what's going on.
Oh, that's great. And I thank you for that book that you've done. I did read it, and I loved it. I just think I run into people periodically who have had that situation, and there really isn't another book like this in the market that I'm aware of.
Yeah, well, no, not from this perspective that I'm aware of, yeah.
So that's good. Matt, let's tie the bow here. And the bow is you are a convert to the Catholic faith. You were in the New Age movement. For those who just tuned in, Matt explained how he had met a woman named Betty and ended up marrying Betty. Betty had been praying for Matthew many years. I think she was 7 years old when she started praying for you.
Right, before we even met.
Yeah.
The man she'd marry someday.
And this is so powerful. Now, you mentioned something that I want to go back to because I think it's so powerful. Many times it's our kids that reach us with the faith.
Sure.
Can you repeat what happened to you?
Of course. Well, it was a question. We were married in the church, although I didn't enter the church.
Right.
And I had put off my instruction until the day the kids came along and started having questions. And it was my eldest son, Macklin, who was not quite 3 years old, and asked a question about the Eucharist that made me realize you can't give what you don't have, and that I needed to take RCIA. And it was while I was there. And we were praying at RCIA. We were praying the Rosary together, and we were praying for the, I started praying the Rosary before I was even baptized.
That's amazing. That's not common.
No, and I can tell you, it's the Blessed Virgin Mary.
Yeah,
absolutely. I give to her prayers and those of my wife. Really, the fact that I was open to receive the grace of the Holy Spirit.
I'm going to ask a question I don't know the answer to, but maybe you would.
Okay.
Are you and Betty consecrated to the Blessed Virgin Mary?
Certainly.
And would you recommend that to all of our listeners?
Absolutely. We do the every year, pretty much. We started a year ago with the whole family of doing the consecration to Jesus, right? The Saint Louis de Montfort.
Good. 33 days.
Yeah. And that's just, it's a beautiful thing. And of course, this last year we used Father Gately's
he's great.
book, and it was really very efficacious for the kids and everything to do it. But that's been a practice that we've had throughout our entire marriage after my conversion. Is to pray the Rosary together every day. So
are you telling me, and this is going to shock a lot of people, I love it too, I have fun doing this, can you tell? Are you going to tell me that with 6 kids, and your wife, that you prayed the Rosary in the evenings as a practice throughout your married life?
Yes, we do it to this day. In fact, I still have my eldest, my son's a combat medic, God bless him.
God love him, thank you for his service.
Right now. And my eldest daughter is going to get married after the first of the year, but she's still living at home, and she prays the Rosary with us, as do all of the rest of the little ducklings, all the way down to our youngest, who's 11 now.
Wow.
And the thing is, when it first started, people would say, gosh, don't they just fall asleep, because they were little. Yeah. And I'm going, what is wrong with that? What could possibly be wrong with falling to sleep to the prayers to the Blessed Virgin and then being carried to bed by your father? Does it get better than that?
No, it doesn't.
I wish I'd grown up that way.
It doesn't. Yeah, exactly. No, that's beautiful.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's about the universal call to holiness, Terry.
That's where I wanted to go with it.
Yeah, it's about all of us. Sanctity isn't just for the clergy. It isn't just for the religious. It's for us all. And that was the big message of Vatican II.
Exactly. The universal call to holiness. In other words, we're saints under construction.
That's right. We are here as lay people to help sanctify the temporal order. It's our job to make the world a holier place.
Boy, I'm going to repeat that. Is this microphone on? Vatican II. To sanctify the temporal order. So what does that mean? That means, Dad, if you're a policeman, you'd be a good policeman. You're a lawyer, you'd be a good lawyer. You're whatever, trash man, whatever job you have. As Fulton Sheen would say, every action's like a blank check. If Christ's name is on it, it has infinite value. So what do? When we consecrate ourselves to Our Lady, we give it all to Jesus through His mother, so that every action can be meritorious. Matt, let me ask you a question before we leave for the day. I want to ask you as a convert about redemptive suffering. Because I know you've been through suffering. You have health issues over the years. You've had problems with your... everybody has problems. How did you understand that great teaching of the Catholic faith on redemptive suffering? 1 Colossians chapter 1, verse 24, I fill up what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ. You're a convert. I asked Scott Hahn this question. When he was a Protestant, he said we didn't have an answer. What do you think about redemptive suffering?
Didn't have an answer either. Suffering, that's one of those things. Why, oh, why would God let this happen? I still ask that from time to time because I'm a human being. I think we all do. But the simple fact of the matter is that there isn't any kind of promise that when you enter the Catholic Church, you're not going to suffer anymore. The difference between someone who is within the body of Christ and someone who is not is that their suffering has meaning.
Amen.
That their suffering is not only manageable because you believe in God and His providence, but that it's actually efficacious for our own salvation and to offer for the salvation of others.
Well said. St. Maximilian Kolbe said, there's 3 stages of life. First, your formation that you're giving your kids right now, mom and dad. Then your apostolate, your fatherhood. You're a priest, you're a brother, you're a sister. That's your apostolate. And the third stage, St. Maximilian Kolbe says, suffering. And you know what? That's what I'm going to leave on. Because without Good Friday, there's no Easter Sunday, as Bishop Sheen would say. Matt Arnold, thank you for joining us here at the Terry and Jesse Show. Your book, Confessions of a Traditional Catholic. Gosh, a great book for those who have left the church, need to come back. Great idea. Thank you for joining us. May God richly bless you, Matt Arnold, and your family. Thank you again, my folks. We'll see you next week. God love you.
For today's giveaway, call 877-526-2151.